Hello, and welcome to Sochogo's Pocket Size Culture Humility webinar. My name is Oscar Gomez. I'm your facilitator today. I encourage you to check out my LinkedIn page to find out more about me, my background, my experience, why I sort of got into being a DEI strategist and my passion for it. I also encourage you to visit Sojogo's LinkedIn page, our company page, to find out more about us. By pocket size, I mean we're going to try to get through everything in 15 to 20 minutes tops. While it may be quick, we are going to cover all the core components of cultural humility, and then at the end, sort of provide you with contact information if you want to learn more. So let's just jump right into things. So in our session overview in this pocket-sized webinar, I'm going to describe some of the learning objectives for today. We're going to define culture, or at least propose a working definition of culture, from which we will sort of build on and go into more of the principles around cultural humility. With that, we're going to sort of just give a broad overview of what cultural humility is, the values around it, a definition. We're going to go into the pillars of cultural humility. And then from there, we're going to move into the relationship between cultural competence and cultural humility. And some of the differences and similarities, but really there's a relationship between the two, and really how cultural humility really moves the needle forward and really sort of inverts the approach to cultural competence to DEI work. We're then going to go into some of the core principles of cultural humility that are really focused on self-awareness, and then some of the skills around cultural humility. Finally, I'm going to propose a few questions for self-reflection that I encourage you to think about and answer to really sort of maybe get started if you're interested in learning more about cultural humility. So our learning objectives today in this short time, first and foremost, we're going to define and understand cultural humility, a little bit of its background, including its core pillars and their values. Secondly, we're going to understand the relationship with and differences between cultural competency and cultural humility that I alluded to just a few minutes ago. And then third, we're going to identify cultural humility strategies that can be adopted and practiced on a daily basis. And that's what I was referring to in terms of self-awareness and some of the skill sets. Culture is essentially a shared systems of values, beliefs, and worldview that's shared amongst a group of people, usually a large group of people, a country, nationalities, race, ethnicity, and other large groups, right? Culture is also learned patterns of behavior, again, that apply to a group of people. Culture is also ever-changing and it's socially framed. So it's essentially a construct and a lens through which a group of people see the world and express themselves in it. As I mentioned, it's expressed in views, attitudes, and behaviors. Now, this includes sort of opinions. It includes art, pop culture, acceptable norms. Culture is also sometimes referred to in categories. So that means it's sort of, there's subcultures and there's, again, this is sort of where ethnicities and nationalities and subcultures sort of come in. And it's often individually defined. So, this is a working definition of culture for today's purposes, but other folks are going to bring a different perspective and a slightly different definition to it. All right. So with that working definition, let's look at what is cultural humility. First of all, just a little bit of background. The term cultural humility and the framework, they were created by two physicians here in San Francisco. I believe they were faculty at San Francisco State University, Dr. Melanie Tervalon and Dr. Jan Murray Garcia. As you can see, cultural humility is about 25 years old. It's been around for a while. And the concept was originally developed to identify and address the power imbalances in the healthcare field. And we'll go into a little bit shortly as to what that means. Now, the concept of cultural humility is widely practiced today in various healthcare settings that usually serve diverse communities, immigrant communities, marginalized, underserved communities. It's also being widely adopted in the social service sector, and it's also part of a higher education nowadays. I know several nursing schools now have a cultural humility courses, as do some medical schools. What are the pillars of cultural humility? So there's three core components that really set the foundation and the framework for cultural humility. First and foremost, it's a lifelong commitment to self-reflection, personal inventory, and continuous learning. So, unlike cultural competence or, say, some other DEI trainings out there, the focus is not on facts or skill sets or external barriers. It really is sort of first and foremost a look inward, and it's a continued commitment, right? It's not something that you look at in one training, you're done, and now you're ready to practice cultural humility. Secondly, a second pillar is that it requires recognition of power dynamics and imbalances among individuals and or institutions. Now, I think given sort of our short, compressed time frame today, I'll explain it through an analogy, right? So if we look at cultural humility practiced in a healthcare setting, um, we look at the relationship between, say, a provider and a patient, a doctor and a patient, right? In many cases, in many cultures, doctors, they're authority figures. They have a lot of credibility. There is a power dynamic, right? Sometimes we take for granted or we just accept whatever the doctor is telling us. And, rightly so, oftentimes they do know what they're talking about. But it's just being aware of those dynamics, right? But with the cultural humility framework in practice, the provider in that case really understands and accepts that responsibility, that onus to address those dynamics with the end goal of having the patient be an equal partner in their healthcare. So what that might look like is sort of bedside manners, inviting, encouraging questions, right? Now, this is going to look very different outside of a healthcare setting, but it's an example of, or an analogy better said, of what we mean by recognition of power dynamics and imbalances. And the third pillar of cultural humility is that it requires an indefinite commitment to institutional accountability. So just like we talked about sort of a commitment on the individual level, it's also an indefinite commitment by a company or organization or an institution. So we can look at it as sort of continuous quality improvement, if you will. And that is what a lot of healthcare settings, community health centers really look at and commit to when they look at cultural humility. So the values that are aligned with cultural humility, first and foremost, it's an openness to new people and new situations. So what this oftentimes looks and feels like is, a little bit of curiosity. Sometimes it might mean sort of finding ourselves or putting ourselves in situations that are a little bit different and maybe make us feel uncomfortable. And with that, essentially, if you will, a byproduct or a skill perhaps, or a quality that's developed is we begin to feel comfortable with being uncomfortable. The second value around cultural humility is an appreciation of others and their differences and their similarities. Part of it is not judgment. Now, biases and judgment, human beings, it's in our nature to do that. So, we check ourselves with that, but it's really coming in with the mindset of appreciating others and things that sort of we find maybe in common with them, but also things that are different. The third value is also an acceptance of the unfamiliar and the unknown. It's important to sort of really sit and think about this, right? When something's unfamiliar and or unknown, it can be stressful, it's anxious, we can be fearful. I mean, these are all very normal and common reactions to things that are unfamiliar and unknown. And cultural humility embraces that. And the fourth value aligned with cultural humility is a flexibility to adapt to new ways of thinking. I like to frame this as, in terms of an individual, it's that sort of to adopt new ways of thinking is akin to a commitment to continuous learning. It's a commitment to just always growing and professional development. And I forgot where I heard this, but it's also a quote that I often use to express this. It's sort of that the definition that sort of mastery is the acceptance and acknowledgement that we're always students and learners, right? So that's what I mean by adopting to new ways of flexibility and thinking. There's always more to learn and always more to grow. So let's look at cultural competence and cultural humility. Now, there is a relationship between the two, and there's also some differences. Um, so, cultural competence is foundational to cultural humility. So, in other words, some of the core tenets of cultural competence are needed. Sort of cultural humility builds on that and goes beyond that. Um, and so, as you can see, I won't read everything to you here, but if you want to take a screenshot of this particular slide so you can look at it more carefully. But there's that relationship between the two. So, in other words, you can't just, if you're looking at cultural humility, you're going to get some of the principles around this, but it's going to go further and deeper. And the lens through which we look at issues around DEI will be different. So, let's look more specifically at what those are. So, this is sort of a side by side look at them. So, whereas cultural competence is really focused on knowing the background of cultures, right? So it's facts and data points. Culture humility um, uh, inverts that, right? It's a critical self reflection. So it's not so much about learning about facts and details about other cultures, which, in my opinion, my experience, is sort of an impossible task. We can never know everything about a culture. Culture is always changing, right? So cultural humility says, or looks at, we look at ourselves, critical self reflection. Cultural competency is a feeling as if you know everything there is to know. I sort of really think it's important to go beyond this cultural competence, right? Because it's sort of, it doesn't make sense to me, frankly, that we don't know everything there is to know. Whereas cultural humility, as we mentioned earlier, is a commitment and a commitment to action, right? To ongoing learning and understanding and curiosity. Cultural competency is focused on knowing a culture's values, whereas cultural humility is about us. It's about being vulnerable, humble, knowing that we don't have all the answers. Um, Cultural competence does focus a little bit on self awareness. Cultural humility really goes into lifetime commitment. Um, and whereas cultural humility really, it really looks at the tangibles, the finite things, right? It's concrete, there's an endpoint almost. Whereas cultural humility really comes to the values, and it embraces values such as love, passion, empathy, equality, compassion, um, terms and values that I feel we don't talk about or are not talked about enough when it comes to our relationship and interactions with others, but I think is really important, and they're core to DEI. Cultural competence sort of tries to look at things at impartiality, whereas the goal of cultural humility is to, again, look at reducing negative power relationships. And you'll see in the center here what are things that they have in common. They both work with differences. They both address inequalities. It's about working collaboratively, and it's bringing our own stories and experiences to a situation. It's not an either or. Again, as you can tell from what I've been sharing, I think cultural humility is vastly more meaningful, impactful, effective, and dare I say even needed than cultural competence. But there is a relationship between the two. So let's look at some of the strategies that we can walk away with and practice. Now, again, I'm not going to read everything to you, but again, I encourage you to maybe take a screenshot of this slide so you can print out and look at more thoroughly. A strategy for cultural humility is self-awareness. We begin with, I value diversity. So I value things that are different, groups of people, or cultures that are different, right? Because an individual is not diverse. Self-awareness is I know myself, right? And inherent in that statement is that, I'm always sort of trying to know myself and understand myself. I understand my culture. So what this means is that commitment to always understanding our culture, always trying to make an effort to understand the lens through which we view the world, the lens that I view the world, say, as an American, but also as a Mexican American, as somebody who was born in an immigrant family, right? I try to understand that those three lenses. I am aware of areas of discomfort, and I'll go even a step further. And I I make a commitment to become comfortable with that discomfort. The next one is I check my assumptions, right? So this is really key because from what I've seen in many other sort of cultural competence or DEI trainings, um, there's terms like unlearning or um, don't say this but say that. Cultural humility doesn't even address that. It's about saying we check our assumptions because we all have um, it's in our nature to sort of make snap judgments, to go based on previous experiences. The thing is to check our assumptions before we act on them. A couple of other strategies for cultural humility and self-awareness is I challenge my stereotypes. This is sort of a step beyond checking our assumptions. I reflect on how my culture informs my judgment. I'm aware of my privilege, right? Gosh, I really wish I could go into this a little bit more, but again, this pocket-sized commitment. Suffice it to say, I encourage you to read this. And the final self-awareness strategy that I'm leaving you with is I have an active interest in social justice issues. So again, this is the term social justice and fairness is unfortunately not really brought into a lot of DEI and cultural competence trainings. But frankly, that's what it's about. That's the core and the root of DEI. There's a component of fairness and justice and the idea that everybody deserves dignity, respect, and an opportunity to thrive and be happy, right? That commitment is core to cultural humility. Now, some skill sets around this. I engage respectfully. So I communicate effectively across different groups. I respect and affirm gender identity. I show respect for differences, right? Again, we may feel uncomfortable. We may have a snap judgment for differences. We check those, and then we sort of replace those assumptions with respect. We remind ourselves, we go back to our values of respect, passion, curiosity. I address my own cultural biases. I can repair relationships. Now, this is what I want to point out because I feel like it's not discussed enough. What I hear sometimes that there's a concern about saying, like, what is the right term to use? I made a mistake. I said the wrong thing. I offended somebody. Chances are most people, I think if you say something with respect, even if it was a mistake, I think most people can understand that. But what's important to know here is that you can repair that relationship. If you said something that perhaps is not the right thing to say, own it, address it, right? And you ask questions. You engage in dialogue. All right, so I'm going to leave you with these 4 questions for self-reflection. I encourage you to sort of write down your thoughts. Be honest. Don't edit yourself. No one's necessarily going to see this, right? But if you really want to sort of explore this and really come with a new frame, it's important to be pretty honest about who you are, who we are. What are your attitudes towards people who are similar? What are our attitudes to people who are different? And once you sort of are honest and sort of start exploring that, then you start looking at how you can act and grow and just be a better sort of professional or human being. All right, so thank you for following along. I appreciate your time and commitment to just learning more about this topic. Get in touch with us. We now have a new Instagram account, LinkedIn. That's my personal LinkedIn QR code. From there, you can link into Sojago's QR code. We have our web address and my email. If you would like to sort of get some resources, I think I have some handouts around this. I might even, if you'd like to get the slides, I could probably email them to you. And if you want to learn more about sort of cultural competence, a more formal workshop series, or how else you can practice or bring this framework to your company, your organization, please reach out. All right, thank you, and see you soon.